Welcome to this Killik Explains finance video. This week, could leverage loans, whatever they are, trigger the next debt crisis? Now, the first thing to say about this video is we need to understand what leverage loans are, and we also need to understand that this is not just about debt markets. So, the background, why are we even investigating this topic, is this. The Bank of International Settlements, who are a bit worried about the growth in this part of the market, have said recently distress amongst indebted borrowers may affect not only investors but also the broader economy. It's a mistake to just think this is jargon in some isolated, random part of the market that won't affect me. It might. So, what is the problem? Bit of jargon coming up. Junk bonds and leverage loans. Now, it's these things that actually are the new problem, potentially. It's that the Bank of International Settlements is kind of saying, not so sure. Need to watch this part of the market carefully. Junk bonds have been around for some time. Leverage loans are like a different version, if you like, of a similar principle. So, with no more ado, junk bonds, well established, made the financial press for all the wrong reasons 10 years ago and so on, are high yield, tradable IOUs issued by companies. So the market we're in is lending to companies in one form or another. Okay, we're not talking about household lending, we're not talking about mortgage-backed securities, we're talking about lending to companies. So, high yield is the key. That's what makes them attractive to investors. Because there's no free lunch in investing, the trade-off is a low credit rating and therefore a higher risk of default. And I cover things like credit ratings in more detail elsewhere. More about that at the end. So there's the deal. They offer little or no security. So investors will buy these things, all right, potentially, because they're looking for a decent yield in a low yield world. Companies will issue them because they're looking to borrow, okay? And basically they can get away with offering little or no security in return. And that's roughly 50%. Now get the size of this number of a $2.65 trillion US dollar market for risky debt. That tells you two things. There's quite a bit of risky debt out there, and these things, which have been around donkey's years, are only about half of it. So what's the other half? And here's the point. Out of left field has come these things, leverage loans. Now I'll say out of left field, in the private equity world, if you like, away from public markets, these are quite well known now, but for a lot of investors it's like, what are these things? Now they're called leverage loans because they're loans to companies that are already potentially quite heavily indebted, hence leverage loan. But they are loans, they're not securities, they're just IOUs issued by companies. So essentially, a company wants money and a lender is prepared to give it to them. They usually offer some security, which ranks them above junk bonds, all right? But of that market I just described, $2.65 trillion, these things represent, nonetheless, around 45%, having doubled in size as a market since 2012. And that's the key point, is the rapid expansion of this market in things called leverage loans. Now, as I said, although they're sometimes talked about as though they're junk bonds, they're not strictly the same thing. Junk bonds are tradable securities, leverage loans are not. They are loans to a company. And that gives them a regulatory advantage as far as the people in this private market are concerned, which I'll come back to in a moment. Now, advantages, they're not subject to the same level of regulation. So, in other words, loans are not regulated as heavily as securities. So that instantly makes this quite an attractive proposition to those people who want to operate away from public markets in, say, the private equity and credit hedge fund space, because the product itself attracts a lighter touch from regulators. Number two, risk can now be spread fairly easily, and that's a key point, via collateralized loan obligations. So with junk bonds, you had the ability to easily repackage them, all right, more about this in a moment, and spread the exposure and the risk across many investors. Now, people who defend these things would say that is the defense mechanism that's going to stop any ripple effect from a single default. But it also means that there is a potentially wide butterfly effect if there is a problem. And I'll come back to CLOs in a moment if you're thinking, how do those do their job? Number three, they are proving cheaper than junk bonds for borrowers. These are advantages. So, partly because they do in theory, and I'll explain what I mean by in theory in a moment, offer some security, whereas junk bonds traditionally don't, they are tending to work out cheaper for borrowers. So, you've got both sides, lenders and borrowers, comfortable with the product. Now, here are some quirks. So, Cov-Lite is one of them. Because lots of people have worked out this is a great way to borrow and lend, lots of new suppliers, if you like, of money are coming into this space, credit hedge funds, private equity and so on, and trying to lend money to willing borrowers. And that has enabled borrowers to turn around and say, well, can we just water down the covenants you normally get on a loan and make it a leverage loan that is Cov-Lite, covenant light. Now, lots of jargon here. What do I mean? Most loans come with covenants. In other words, these are clauses that protect the lender. If you take out a mortgage agreement, there are clauses that protect the lender, like they can seize your house if you don't keep up repayments and so on. For a company, typical clauses, these are basically security features, could cover key ratios. So the lender might say, right, you've got to make sure, once I've lent you the money, your debt to assets ratio doesn't breach a certain prescribed limit. It might mean they've got to hang on to key staff. So the lender's got some assurance that the company will be run the right way to repay the debt. It might be restrictions on asset sales. Okay, it might be clauses relating to earnings or dividend policy targets, in other words. So lots of ways that a lender can potentially make things less risky. And the point about coverlight is a coverlight agreement basically says, well, that's all very well, but basically we don't need all of that. Let's keep it a bit simpler. And you can imagine if you are a new whippersnapper lender coming into this market, that's one way you can attract the attention of borrowers by simply canning some of the traditional covenants. And that has got the Bank of International Settlements, amongst others, a bit nervous. When there's tons of liquidity, lenders don't value covenants. Well, there is tons of liquidity. Central banks have created it over the last 10 years, and they're willing to lend at very high leverage values. So says Douglas Diamond, finance professor at Chicago Booth School of Business. And that's the point. And we've seen that growth coming through. Now, coverlight loans as a version of leverage loans are growing rapidly. They're now 80% estimated of new leveraged issuance versus only 25% in 2006-2007, according to Moody's. So you see the change there, 80% plays 25. Their value's doubled in Europe, according to S&P, since 2016-17. So that gives you an idea of the acceleration in terms of both leveraged loans, that's the earlier slide, and coverlight within that space. And it's fueled by competition into the market. So more and more people are piling into the market, prepared to ditch covenants, prepared to do deals on leveraged loans. Now, collateralized loan obligations are a key part of this, because what these enable basically lenders to do is to package up these loans and bring in more people. Now, some people would say that spreads the risk and that's a good thing. The Bank of International Settlements would say the fact that risk is spread could be a bad thing. Why? Well, basically, this is a way of spreading default risk across multiple lenders. Okay? It delivers an exposure and income stream beyond the original lender. So the motive here is basically to bring in, from an investment point of view, more people who want to generate or get a high yield on their money. And the CLO might enable them to do that. Okay? The overall market has doubled since the financial crisis, so it's clear quite a few people are interested in CLOs, and the market has grown accordingly. Now, mechanics-wise, it's called a collateralized loan obligation. Original loans, so take 100 loans for example, can be bundled up and sold on. What you do is slice them into tranches and sell those tranches, and investors pay their money and take their choice according to how much risk and therefore yield they're looking for. It tends to suit yield-hungry investors. There are plenty of those around in what's been a relatively low interest rate world. So the basic mechanics, take a pool of leveraged loans, I'm summarising a lot of stuff in a short slide here, divide it up into tranches. All right, so you tend to find tranche 1, tranche 2, tranche 3, tranche 4. So let's say basically you're going to get more risk as you move down the tranches and less security, okay? And then investors pay their money and take their choice. So each tranche carries a different yield profile, different risk premium. Okay? So this brings more investors in to the leverage loan space, if you like, indirectly rather than directly. So where's the risk? You might think that sounds brilliant. Spread risk, like insurance. What's the risk? Well, basically, since the financial crisis, this is the interesting point. Where are we looking for trouble? Now, some would say conventional banks, possibly not. So after the financial crisis, everyone analysed, including regulators, the conventional banks, global banks, and regulators stood on them quite hard and said, we're going to restrict the way you make loans, we're going to force you to hold more capital. Households are more conservatively financed too now, arguably than they were 10 years ago. So if you're looking around for trouble, I'm not saying you should as an investor, but if you were looking for trouble, maybe you wouldn't look at conventional banks, famous last words of course. Maybe household debt is more under control than it was 10 years ago. So some commentators are saying here is a space where we might see the first signs of trouble this time around. It's the space that is taken up with companies, corporates, and the sort of shadow banking system. Okay, the private equity houses, credit hedge funds, and so on. Sovereign wealth funds, all of those. Now, specifically, Because you might say, well, if that's all off-piste and away from public markets, why am I affected? Well, here's the point. Rising interest rates could put borrowers under pressure. Where there are lots of these cov-like loans in existence, lenders might suddenly find they can't liquidate those positions as easily as they thought they could, and that, if you've packaged those up incorrectly by CLOs, could lead to a ripple effect. And that ripple effect could put pressure not just on borrowers, but lenders and guarantors. So that's primary lenders, if you like, who originated the loans, and the secondary ones via CLOs, and guarantors, so clearinghouses that are underpinning, any guarantors underpinning both sides of this agreement could come under pressure. And that's where, because those clearinghouses are underpinned by conventional banks, that's where the BIS says, got to look out for the potential ripple effect back into the mainstream markets. Massive topic, lots of technical terms there, so editor at killik.com if you'd like to know more, and watch related videos that explain some of the jargon I rattled through, killik.com/learn, and I'd head for the bonds tab.